With Avatar: The Way of Water premiering in theaters, I've seen a whole lot of people take to the internet to trash talk the original and dismiss the franchise as nothing more than spectacle cinema. But I wholeheartedly disagree with that sentiment. See, despite what many people think, there is so much more to Avatar than meets the eye. And while the groundbreaking CGI and 3D presentation might have heavily contributed to the film's box office success, I assure you that there is an incredibly high quality film underneath all of the shiny bells and whistles. So, let's explore why exactly the haters are wrong and what makes Avatar. The most common criticism I hear people levy against James Cameron's Avatar is that if you take away the cool visuals and special effects, all you're left with is a generic knockoff of Dances with Wolves. But this bothers me for a number of reasons. Firstly, film is above all else a visual medium. Even if it was true that all Avatar had going for it was breathtaking imagery, who cares? James Cameron filled the nearly 3-hour runtime with countless screensaver-worthy shots, and consistently uses the camera to immerse you in the awe-inspiring world of Pandora. Theaters could show the film without any sound, and it would still be worth the price of admission. Secondly, Dances with Wolves is a great movie, and Dances with Space Wolves sounds even better. In all seriousness though, original ideas are highly overrated in storytelling. Most plots are derivative to one degree or another, and the magic of storytelling comes in the specifics of a story's world and characters, not the broader plot. Even when it comes to Dances with Wolves specifically, other films had already stolen large amounts of its structure before Avatar, with Pocahontas and Tom Cruise's Last Samurai being the most obvious examples. Put simply, the archetype of a man being taken in by another culture and assimilating to their lifestyle is a compelling one, no matter how many times we've seen it before. Now, as a result of copying Dances with Wolves, Avatar is guilty of falling into the white savior trope, which I do think is a valid issue to point out. That being said, James Cameron has used a large portion of the film's earnings to fund conservation efforts and raise awareness for the issues faced by indigenous tribes and people. So overall, the film certainly caused more good than it did harm. The last critique I want to talk about is that Avatar isn't complex enough of a film. And while it's absolutely true that the core narrative of the movie is a simple one, Avatar's simplicity is also its greatest strength. An idea I see pop up within film criticism a lot is that complexity and quality are directly correlated, or that the more mechanically intricate a story is, the better. But this couldn't be more misguided. Yes, the plot twists and big brain concepts in a Christopher Nolan flick are part of what make those movies appealing. But at the same time, a franchise like John Wick thrives off of straightforward plots and simplistic motivations. At the end of 2022, Top Gun Maverick is still king of the box office. And from a narrative standpoint, that's about as simple as you can get. In the case of Avatar, the straightforward nature of the story means that every second can be dedicated to the movie's core message. Sure, encouraging people to live in harmony with nature and preserve the environment isn't a groundbreaking concept, but it is an important one. The direct, somewhat on-the-nose way in which Cameron conveys that message is intentional. The morals are clear, and the line between good and evil is explicit, because that's how the director feels about the topic of conservation. There's no reason to sympathize with the villains ravaging Pandora, because they're an allegory for the people and corporations destroying our own planet. And hopefully, you don't feel bad for those guys either. But now that we've addressed why people are wrong about Avatar, let's delve into the aspects of this movie that really make it. Right off the bat, we need to talk about the masterful world building present in this movie. I have nothing but good things to say about Sam Worthington, but he's not actually the star of the film. That distinction belongs to Pandora itself. More than anything else, the appeal of Avatar is being able to visit the verdant world of Pandora, gawking at the bioluminescent jungles and strange yet majestic wildlife. When the film first released, people were reported as having experienced intense bouts of depression, as they realized they would never actually visit the homeworld of the Na'vi. And honestly, I can see why. The planet isn't all that different from our own. It's not like most sci-fi films, which strive to show us worlds that are completely foreign or scientifically accurate. Pandora is intentionally made out to be a hyper-idyllic version of Earth because the film is designed to reignite the audience's love for our own environment. That being said, the interconnectedness on display throughout the entire ecosystem is fascinating as a concept. The way scientists can quantifiably track the signals being sent between the forest and its inhabitants is really neat, especially considering the Na'vi are the only humanoids that can actually tap into said network. A lot of jokes have been made regarding the Na'vi ponytails, but if you take away the more intimate implications, it elegantly captures the idea of nature being in harmony with itself. More so than Pandora, I think the way life back on Earth is talked about is really intriguing. A lot of it is glossed over briefly in the opening narration, but the little details we get paint a really horrifying picture of humanity and its future. The fact that Earth is slowly dying isn't all that new, but the way they explore wealth and poverty is particularly refreshing. Essentially, the wealth gap is wider than ever. Technological advancements have made things like fixing a spine possible, but only for the uber wealthy. Interstellar travel is achievable, but only the most monopolistic of corporations can afford it. Rewatching the film, something I thought was really interesting is that there is no government represented on Pandora. The RDA is a private business. The soldiers, even though they're ex-military, are nothing more than mercenaries on this world. I think it's a clever, albeit depressing, condemnation of the fact that corporations are superseding actual nations as the predominant superpower here on Earth. Ultimately, the world building itself isn't terribly groundbreaking, but it's visually beautiful and elegantly facilitates the themes of the story. A more inventive world might have been interesting, but would ultimately have hurt the film as a whole. The worlds of Avatar first and foremost highlight the best and worst parts of Earth in real life. However, even if Pandora is the star of Avatar, I'd be remiss not to talk about the supporting cast of characters. Jake Sully is our protagonist, and in a lot of ways, functions as an audience surrogate. We are quite literally seeing this new planet through his eyes, and our connection to Pandora grows in tandem with his. Yes, Jake can feel a bit generic at times, but once again, this is intentional. The whole reason James Cameron cast an unknown actor was so that the audience could more easily see themselves in them. It's not a subtle metaphor, but Jake essentially acts as an avatar for the viewer, and I do think he makes it easy to get immersed in the narrative. That being said, I think the use of Jake in this story is actually really fascinating. A lot of people forget that Jake wasn't actually supposed to go to Pandora in the first place. His twin brother, a scientist, was a part of the Avatar program, but was murdered, leaving Jake as the only one who could sync up with the body. This makes it so that Jake immediately feels out of place, which is an excellent setup, seen as the whole story is about finally finding somewhere that you belong. As a disillusioned veteran, he sticks out like a sore thumb among the scientists he's working with. However, this actually winds up being a good thing. As Neytiri's mother points out,
"It is hard to fill a cup which is already full."
Meaning that those who rely too heavily on intellect will never be able to let go of their previously held beliefs. But Jake, who has yet to find a belief system he's willing to fight for, is in the perfect position to learn the Na'vi ways and truly assimilate to their culture. Neytiri regularly refers to him as a stupid baby, but his infantile mind is what allows him to be truly reborn. He leads with his heart instead of his head, and I just think there's something intriguing about framing naivete as a character's strength rather than weakness. Speaking of Neytiri, Zoe Saldana'S performance is probably the best in the entire movie. I take some issue with how much trauma James Cameron dumps on her, but man, does Saldana nail every single scene that she is in. As an actress, she is particularly talented at emoting, which is further enhanced by the enlarged eyes of the Na'vi. She's the emotional core of this film, and carries that burden masterfully. With regards to the character and how she relates to the narrative, I think she's utilized quite effectively. It's easy to look at her as just another one of the Na'vi people, but upon closer inspection, we see that she's a bit of an outsider, which allows her to better relate to Jake. She's daughter to both the chief and spiritual leader of the Omotakaya. Her path in life is largely predetermined, and though she walks it with dignity, we get hints at an underlying desire for more freedom. There's this subtle moment when her mother tasks her with training Jake, and she gives this exaggerated eye roll groan combo that I think really humanizes the character. There are elements of the noble savage trope that seep into Cameron's depiction of Pandora, but moments like these really flesh out the Na'vi as real people. Another key moment of her pushing back against her predetermined role in the tribe is when she spends the night with Jake. It's briefly mentioned that she's been promised to Sute, so becoming Jake's bonded partner directly spits in the face of that promise. And while Jake doesn't necessarily know that, Neytiri very much does. It's a conscious, pointed act of defiance that goes largely unaddressed, but really says a lot about the character. I think this exemplifies the poetic symmetry of Jake and Neytiri's character arcs. They both learn from people unlike themselves, and find an unexplored middle ground in the process. Also, I think she's an excellent depiction of feminine strength in film. She's highly independent and a fiercely capable fighter, but the film also doesn't make a big deal about it. Her gender is a part of who she is, but it doesn't hold her back. Then again, pretty much all the women in this film are awesome. Michelle Rodriguez is endlessly entertaining to watch as the grizzled pilot Trudy, and Sigourney Weaver is, well, come on, she's Sigourney Weaver. As for the bad guys, there's not a lot of depth to them, but they serve their purpose well. Giovanni Ribisi is a hyper-capitalist jerk that's easy to hate, and the RDA as a whole are a visually intriguing force for our heroes to fight against. However, I have to dedicate some time to Colonel Quaritch. Stephen Lang's hyper-militaristic bad guy is, in my opinion, one of the highlights of the whole movie. Sure, he is a one-dimensional, cartoonishly evil antagonist, but I'll be gosh darned if he isn't one of the best cartoon villains of all time. Lang has so much fun with the character, and the way he chews up the scenery whenever he's on screen almost makes you forget how much you're supposed to hate him. I feel like audiences have been conditioned to assume that a larger-than-life performance like this is inherently lesser than more subtle characterizations, but Stephen Lang 100% knows the assignment, and is nailing it. I'm not looking for subtlety in a guy whose codename is Papa Dragon. He just needs to be cool and look good in a mech suit. Speaking of looking good, let's talk about the cinematography. Obviously, the wow factor of the 3D is the first thing people think of, but this movie is still a visual feast in its two-dimensional presentation. With CGI-heavy movies like this, it's easy to pay more attention to what's on camera than how the camera is actually capturing the subject. You see this in the Star Wars prequels, where the designs of the world are super unique, but they're depicted through pretty straightforward camera work most of the time. However, in Avatar, James Cameron pays incredibly close attention to where the camera is placed in the virtual environment. He really likes to play with perspective, and puts you directly in the shoes of the characters on screen. When Jake first enters his avatar, there is an immense joy that is palpable, and Cameron chooses to linger on every little sensation that Jake experiences. What further immerses the viewer is that much of the digital cinematography is made to replicate realistic camera movement and positioning. In particular, he uses a bunch of crash zooms throughout the runtime. These manual zoom-ins remind us that we're seeing footage from a camera, which ironically makes the CGI elements feel much more tangible. The other little touch I love is the color grading. Cameron puts a bluish-green haze over the scenes where Jake is human, and then uses a much more natural palette when he's in his avatar body. This contrast becomes more and more intense as the film progresses, and is a great way of hinting that Jake doesn't really belong among the RDA. Only in his Na'vi form is he truly at home. The last element of this movie I want to touch on is what I believe to be the film's X factor. It's the secret ingredient that really makes the project resonate with me, and why I'm so excited to live in a world where we are getting 1.5 billion Avatar sequels. Avatar is one of the most sincere films I've ever seen. There's not an ounce of irony or cynicism to be found in the almost 3-hour feature. Now, it's not a perfect film by any means. It has many faults and a plethora of
Oopsie, that's problematic.
moments. However, at least for me, that's easy to overlook thanks to all the love that went into this film. James Cameron poured everything that he has into making this project. He is enamored with the universe he has created, and as a result, it's all too easy for the audience to fall in love with it as well. Like I said before, the message of Avatar is not profound, but it is important. This is a movie with a clear sense of purpose. It's easy to see that the whole creative team was on board with what Cameron was trying to accomplish, and that is something special in the world of cinema. I'm Dylan, and this has been The Writer's Block.